The morning it all began, I was still in the shed, tinkering with the animal's water troughs, when I heard a high-pitched screech coming from outside. I thought some animal had gotten loose. Indeed, it had. But the problem wasn't the escape itself. The real apocalypse, in the view of my esteemed neighbor, was the fact that my cow, Clementina, with her docile soul and active bowels, had dared to poop on her sacred lawn. Yes, you read that right. A pile of manure has become a cause for civil war. The woman came bursting through my door, holding a supermarket bag as if she were carrying a radioactive bomb. Inside was the triumphant proof of the crime, the freshly collected manure from her lawn. She waved the bag in the air as if she wanted to baptize me with it and started shouting about moral damages, disturbance of order, and other expressions that seemed straight out of a Mexican soap opera or a legal pamphlet printed in a bus station print shop. Not content with invading my space with theatrical accusations, she threatened to call the environmental police, the zoonosis center, the mayor, and, if time allowed, even the UN. At that moment, I could only think of two things. Firstly, that she must have serious cow traumas. Secondly, that the day promised to be longer than a bad movie marathon. But of course, she didn't stop there. What was supposed to be a simple conversation between neighbors turned into an escalation worthy of a courtroom. The next day, I received a notice. The woman had actually sued me. The reason? Damage to private property and impairment of emotional well-being caused by unauthorized bovine feces. The unauthorized part made me laugh for half an hour, as if there was a custom system for cow poop. The lawsuit was 3 pages long, 3 pages, with improvised reports, photos of stained grass, and even a quote from a 1998 Residents Association manual on aesthetic maintenance of green areas. I thought it was a joke, but the notary's seal was real, and so was the deadline for replying. That's when I realized that, if I didn't do something, that woman really could drag me through a surreal legal saga over a perfectly natural physiological act. Not to mention the exaggeration, she even had the audacity to tell the other neighbors that she was fighting an ecological attack, as if Clementina were a chemical weapon with legs. Over the next few days, I found myself caught up in a sequence of absurdities that made me rethink the concept of collective sanity. The woman hired a gardener to assess the permanent damage to the grass, installed a property under surveillance, no defecating sign. Yes, that's right. And wrote a letter to the neighborhood newspaper with the headline, "How far does rural impunity go?" Clementina, meanwhile, remained impassive, chewing hay and observing everything with that calm, bovine look that only ruminants have. I confess that I began to envy her, because while I was collecting bills and legal threats, she just existed, free of worries and completely oblivious to the diplomatic chaos she had unleashed with a simple poop. I began to think of solutions, maybe paying the woman, just to get it over with. But then I asked myself, how far does the dignity of a man who bows down to someone who collects feces in plastic bags go? No, I couldn't. I needed a more creative way out, something that was as absurd as the accusation, something that lived up to the theater she had put on. It was then, in a sleepless night of coffee and revolt, that an idea occurred to me. If the cow was the problem, and the cow had caused emotional damage, why not invert the logic? Why not turn Clementina into a legal ally? Not as a witness, of course. She's good with grass, not words. But what if she gained a new status? Something that would shield her from any future accusations? That's when the phrase came to me, like a hellish epiphany, emotional support dog. And in that instant, something inside me changed. No, I wasn't going mad. I was enlightened. Clementina was going to become more than a cow. She was going to become a symbol, a shield, a humorous mockery of bureaucracy and unnecessary drama. The plan was set. The woman had no idea what lay ahead, and I honestly couldn't wait to see her try to sue an animal protected by federal law. The next day, with cup of coffee in hand and the determination of someone who decides they've had enough of life, I began my journey to turn a dairy cow into an emotional support dog. Yes, it may sound like the kind of thing someone would only do under the influence of substances or desperation, but, believe me, nothing pushes you further into the arms of bureaucratic insanity than a neighbor who treats manure as a federal crime. I started researching the requirements for registering an animal as an emotional support. I discovered, with a mixture of astonishment and ironic pleasure, that the legislation on this is as vague as a horoscope prediction. There are no strict rules limiting the species of animal. The important thing is a psychological report proving the owner's need. There have been cases of people registering pigs, peacocks, and even a lizard as a therapeutic companion. A cow, as unusual as it was, didn't seem totally out of the legal realm. And, honestly, if someone can calm down with a cat that scratches the sofa, why not with a 600-kilo creature that chews in a mantra rhythm? I made an appointment with a psychologist, one of those who advertises emotional assessment services in big letters on the internet. I arrived at the office not knowing exactly what to say, so I did what anyone in my position would do. I exaggerated everything. I talked about anxiety, insomnia, existential crises. I said that the only thing that brought me peace was contact with Clementina. I talked about her breathing, her smell, the tranquility I felt watching her ruminate. It was an Oscar-worthy performance. And the man, with a compassionate look and a notepad that looked more like a ticket for my revenge, said he understood. At the end of the session, I left with a stamp certifying that I suffered from mild anxiety and that my cow played an essential role in my emotional well-being. I went home feeling like a mixture of a genius and a scoundrel. With the report in hand, I began the formal process. The paperwork was ridiculous, but I filled in every field with a smile on my face. Name of the animal, Clementina. Species, bovine. Purpose, emotional support. I signed it, attached the report, even included a photo of Clementina with a makeshift collar, because of course an emotional cow needs style, and sent everything to the support animal registry. A week later, I received confirmation. Everything was approved. Clementina was officially my emotional dog, and the woman had unknowingly lost the war before she even heard the first shot. The following week, she reappeared. She was carrying another plastic bag that looked like forensic evidence. Once again, the cow had invaded the sacred lawn and left its organic signature there. The woman came snorting like a locomotive, talking about recidivism, bad faith, and demanding that I pay for the accumulated damage. It was at that moment that I felt the sweet taste of poetic justice. I calmly handed her a laminated copy of Clementina's record as my emotional support dog. Her silence lasted less than 3 seconds. Then came the shouting. She said it was ridiculous, that she wouldn't accept it, that a cow couldn't be a dog, that the world had lost its mind. And I just agreed. Yes, the world has lost its mind, but look who started it. She promised to appeal. She said she would take the case to court. And I, with all the elegance that a person with a domesticated cow can muster, wished her luck. After all, she was about to sue not just a cow, but a cow with legal protection, emotional support, and a bell necklace that jingled every time she walked down the sidewalk. The next few days were delightful. The woman started walking around with half-closed eyes, as if Clementina and I were undercover agents in a plot to destroy her lawn. She installed cameras, surrounded the garden with small colored stakes, and started leaving the house with a spray bottle of vinegar in her hand, as if she could repel cattle with acidity. The irony is that Clementina, now officially recognized, began to frequent every space with me. I took her for a walk in the street, as required. I passed in front of her house with the cow trotting happily beside me. The sound of the little bell was like heavenly music. The woman even filmed it, shouting that I was making fun of her. And, deep down, I was, but with all the legality that the system allowed me. Finally, the icing on the cake, I discovered that, as a registered emotional support animal, Clementina was even entitled to go to public establishments with me, depending on the rules of the place. I took her to the neighborhood park for a symbolic walk. The children loved it. Someone took a photo and called me an alternative welfare activist. The woman who saw the cow in the park stood across the street, looking like she was witnessing the end of civilization. I just stroked my emotional companion's forehead, took a deep breath, and thought, this is far from over, because she certainly still had cards to play, and I was more than ready to respond with all the legal, emotional, and bovine arsenal at my disposal. It didn't take long for the circus to reopen. About 3 days after the walk in the park, I received a new court notice. The woman had indeed filed another lawsuit, this time asking for Clementina's emotional support status to be revoked. The document was a masterpiece of desperation. It said that my cow could not, from any rational point of view, be considered a dog, that this was an affront to common sense, public order, and the dignity of the condominium. I confess I was flattered. It was as if Clementina and I were leading a cultural revolution. But what really got me laughing was the passage where she claimed that the animal's constant presence was affecting her emotional stability. In other words, the woman who sued me for cow poop was now claiming psychological trauma caused by the presence of the same animal. A kind of karmic cycle so ironic that even Clementina seemed to understand it, looking at me with that bovine, "See?" look. I was called to testify at a preliminary hearing. When I arrived, she was already there, impeccable, in that beige blazer typical of those who want to appear more sensible than they really are. On the other side of the room, I sat next to my lawyer, a middle-aged man who found the whole story so absurd that he took the case just for the fun of it. And Clementina? No, she wasn't taken, not least because transporting a bovine to the courthouse would require logistics that even I wasn't willing to face. But I did take photos, reports, and even a short video showing my routine with her on the farm, like a behind-the-scenes look at an unlikely friendship. During the hearing, she spoke for 20 minutes without taking a breath. She whimpered about her garden, about the constant fear of waking up and seeing the cow in her yard, and about the public humiliation of living next to a cattle farmer who masquerades as a court comedian. Yes, those were her words. And when it was my turn to speak, I didn't even need half that time. I just showed the documents, described the real benefits that Clementina brought me, without sarcasm, oddly enough, and ended with a simple question. Since when does emotional affection need to have 4 legs and know how to fetch a ball to be recognized? The judge didn't decide anything at that moment, of course, but I could see, from the corner of his mouth as he tried to hold back his laughter, that the woman was fighting against windmills, and that this time, she was the one who was going to get poop on her shoe. The truth was that the more she tried to fight back, the more she exposed her own ridiculousness. And instead of backing down, she doubled down. She started sticking up flyers in the neighborhood with headlines like, "Is your property safe? Danger can weigh half a ton," and photos of me next to Clementina, clearly taken from a distance, as if we were rural criminals. Even neighbors who used to ignore my existence began to approach me. Some laughed, others asked if it was true. Some even asked to take a selfie with the therapist cow. Clementina, poor thing, didn't even know she had become a micro-celebrity. Of course, all fame has its price. One night, I woke up to the sound of footsteps in my backyard. Peering out of the window, I saw a woman with a flashlight, sneaking between the fences, as if she were about to rescue a hostage from war. I don't know if she wanted to gather more evidence or simply to scare me, but when she tripped over a bucket and fell down sitting in the mud, I swear I had to bite my pillow to keep from laughing out loud. I pretended I didn't see anything, but the next day, I found an anonymous note in the mailbox with the words, "Your provocation won't beat common sense." Ah, my dear, if teasing won championships, I'd have lifted the cup by now. While she collapsed in spasms of indignation, I got on with my life. Clementina, too. She now had a reserved space in the yard, with a little sign saying, "Emotional Wellness Area." It was my little provocation, a reminder that if the woman wanted war, she would have it, but on my field, with my rules, and with cow dung as ammunition, if necessary. The final straw, it seems, was when she discovered that Clementina's registration not only prevented any legal action related to the animal's behavior, but also obliged her, according to neighborhood regulations, to respect the rights of therapeutic animals. In other words, she was now legally prohibited from harassing the cow. Imagining her expression when she read that is a memory I treasure. Because, after all, I wasn't just defending an animal or my backyard. I was defending my right to live in peace, even if that peace came in the form of a half-ton, slow-digesting animal. And the most curious thing of all is that, over time, Clementina really began to play this role in me. At first it was just sarcasm, of course, but little by little, amidst the chaos of notifications, crossed eyes, and condominium gossip, she was the one who kept me centered. Seeing that huge creature, peaceful and oblivious to everything, helped me not to fall into the same hole of hatred that the neighbor plunged headlong into. I knew she hadn't given up yet, that something more was to come. But at that point, it was no longer about winning or losing. It was about keeping my sanity in the face of someone who had chosen to turn her life into a courtroom. What if her next move was worse? Let it come. I had Clementina. I had my report, and I was sure that, in that absurd dispute, it wasn't exactly the cow who was playing the part of an irrational animal. I should have predicted that she wouldn't know how to lose. Some people don't accept failure even when it's stamped, registered, and notarized. The woman not only lost in court, she also lost her composure. If before she was just a nosy neighbor with a distorted sense of proportion, now she had become a kind of public order missionary, trying to convince the whole neighborhood that I represented a threat to civilization. I had become, in her eyes, a kind of rural heretic, and the cow, a demonic creature sent by the gods of anarchy to destroy her grass and her inner peace. The week after the judge's decision, she organized a kind of emergency meeting with the residents of the neighborhood association. She called it an Assembly for the Defense of Collective Welfare, as if she were fighting an outbreak of rabies or preventing the installation of a toxic waste factory. He spread leaflets, sent emails, rang doorbells. I even saw a banner being hung at the entrance to the condominium, in bold letters, "No to rural permissiveness," whatever that meant. Of course I was invited, or rather, summoned with an anonymous note left in my mailbox. "Your presence is required." I went, purely for sport. I was prepared for everything: hostility, crossed eyes, perhaps even an attempt to make me promise to keep Clementina locked up in an anti-odor bunker. But what I saw there surpassed even my most pessimistic expectations. She had set up a projector, a slideshow, with topics, graphs, and even a timeline showing the bovine invasion, from the first poop to the walk in the park. Dramatic instrumental music played in the background. She spoke with the intensity of someone who denounces war crimes. She described Clementina as a walking menace and called me a manipulator of legal loopholes. She even tried to suggest that my emotional report had been bought, which made my lawyer, sitting next to me like someone watching a comedy of dubious taste, let out a low, almost heartfelt laugh. But then came the final blow. She presented a proposed amendment to the association's regulations, a new clause that would explicitly prohibit the presence of animals weighing more than 50 kilos outside enclosed spaces, regardless of their legal classification. It was clearly an attempt to target me directly, since Clementina weighed more than half a ton and ate very little. The vote was scheduled for a week later, and then I saw the extent of the game she was playing. She knew that on paper she could no longer do anything against me, but if she changed the neighborhood rules, she could isolate me, fence me in, make me the official pariah of the neighborhood. It was the rural Cold War, and she was willing to burn bridges, friendships, and any shred of common sense to win. That's when I decided it was time to react with more than sarcasm and passive resistance. I needed to do what she would never expect: gain support. I spent the next few days visiting the neighbors, but not with inflammatory arguments or legal threats. I got hit, literally. I made corn cakes, cheese bread, guava jam. I rang doorbell after doorbell, introduced myself simply, told the whole story without exaggeration, letting the absurdity speak for itself. And of course, I introduced Clementina to a few people in person. She was always docile, licked the hand of anyone who came near, made her innocent face, and ruminated as if she were meditating in silence. There was a neighbor who cried with laughter when she heard that the cow was registered as a dog. She said it was the most ingenious thing she had ever heard. The assembly arrived. The woman, as always, arrived dressed for war. I stood at the back of the room in silence. When they opened the vote, she made the most impassioned speech of all. And when the president of the association asked for the votes, I confess, I didn't breathe for a good few seconds. The proposal was rejected by a comfortable margin. The majority of those present had voted against the new rule, and not because they liked me, but because they had eyes, ears, and, above all, a sense of proportion. A cow pooping on a lawn didn't justify the chaos she had created. She left the room without looking at anyone. She walked down the stairs as if she were returning from a funeral. And there, in that moment, I understood something. She didn't just lose to me. She lost to her own inability to live in a world where sometimes things just happen, where a cow can escape, a turd can fall, and people can deal with it without calling for an apocalypse. After that, she never spoke to me again, not even a glance. She started erecting higher fences, planted bushes in place of grass, and installed a security camera which, from the angle, seemed to monitor my side of the property exclusively. As for me, I continue to live my life calmly. Clementina continues to be my emotional support, although these days she's more of a friend than anything else. I still take her for a walk from time to time, just to provoke a strategic tinkling of the little bell. And you know what? She never pooped on the woman's lawn again. It's as if she had understood, in her bovine and mysterious way, that the war was over, that her land no longer deserved the honor of receiving even the humblest of her excrement. In the end, that's it. That's life. Sometimes, all you need to face an avalanche of bitter people is a good-hearted cow, a bit of irony, and the willingness to turn the absurd into art, because when you learn to laugh at chaos, it stops swallowing you up. And if one day someone asks me how I managed to win a legal battle against a woman obsessed with cow poo, I'll only answer, with class, with patience, and with a clementine. And if you liked this video, don't forget to leave your like and comment below.